Hey, it's Max Mo and welcome to Max Mo's Travels. In this video, I'll be providing an overview of an epic itinerary for an 8-day self-drive trip to the Canadian Rockies. I'll provide a carefully curated 8-day itinerary for the mature and discerning traveller to help you plan and execute your perfect trip to the Rockies. It'll save you endless time and help ensure you see all the great attractions in the Rockies. Join me. This video will be the first of a series of videos that I make about my epic trip to the Canadian Rockies earlier this year. There's an abundance of information and YouTube videos about what to do and what to see in the Canadian Rockies. And what I found particularly difficult when planning my trip to the Rockies was how I was going to organise the trip. What was the itinerary? Where was I going to start? What was I going to do next? What was the distance and time to get from one place to another? How long should I spend at each attraction? Well, this video hopefully will address all your concerns and help plan your perfect itinerary to the Rockies. The itinerary that I set out is aimed at the mature and discerning traveller. People that have got reasonable or modest mobility and fitness, want to see all the best attractions and don't want to go on extreme hikes or dangerous things like whitewater rafting, for example. The itinerary starts in Calgary, the gateway to the Canadian Rockies. It ends in Merritt on the way to Vancouver. You can amend this itinerary by going back to Banff and Calgary rather than going to Merritt if you wish. We had an absolutely fabulous time in the Canadian Rockies. I do think that our itinerary and all our planning came to fruition and we had a marvellous time. We visited the area and Jasper National Park just before the wildfires hit in July 2024. As at the date that I'm editing this, which is early September 2024, Jasper National Park and many of its attractions are closed to visitors. If you're intending to visit, I would suggest that you plan your visit for the spring and summer season of 2025. Check the National Park's website to make sure that attractions are open again. I'll leave a link in the description. And my thoughts and prayers go out to the residents of the Jasper area. And please show your support for the residents by visiting the park and all its fabulous attractions once visitors are accepted in the area again. For a number of reasons, we began our trip to the Rockies on the 1st of June. If I was to organise this trip again, I'd probably aim to go in the middle of or the third week of June, where the weather should be a little bit warmer than what we experienced. This region is a mountainous region and the weather can change quite quickly. We were fortunate that we planned and brought a lot of warm weather gear with us as well as layers and didn't really experience the cold that much. Speaking of experience of cold, it was marvellous seeing all the snow-capped mountains and hills and just being in an environment that we're not usually accustomed to. A lot of time, effort and planning was spent in making this a perfect trip. If you're interested in following my itinerary, I have produced a one-page PDF of my itinerary that's available for free download from my Buy Me a Coffee storefront. Click on the QR code on the screen or use the link in the description. I've also created a paid 11-page detailed ultimate itinerary for the Canadian Rockies. It's an 8-day self-drive trip that includes tips and tricks, how to get there, accommodation, distances, maps. It's a fantastic guide that will save you time and effort in planning your perfect Canadian Rocky itinerary. Our itinerary begins in Calgary. Calgary, with its international airport, is the gateway for international visitors wishing to go to the Canadian Rockies. We stayed at the Hampton Inn at Calgary Airport. The hotel has a very handy shuttle to the airport. We used the shuttle to go back to the airport and pick up a hire car. Our first destination is Banff. It's about 143 kilometres and an hour and a half away from Calgary Airport. The road there is absolutely stunning. It's your first chance to get an opportunity to see the vastness of the Canadian Rockies. All the roads throughout the area are a fantastic standard. The only thing that we had to contend with was driving on the opposite side to the road that we're used to. Now you do need to buy a pass to enter all Canadian national parks, Banff National Park and Jasper National Park. We did this by purchasing an annual pass before we left Australia. You can get single day passes, but if you're staying more than a week, the annual pass is the most cost-effective way to go. I'll leave a link in the description. Ideally, you'd want to book your accommodation in Banff. The time we booked, the accommodation was very, very expensive and quite limited, so we end up booking accommodation in Canmore, a 20-odd minute drive from Banff. There's limited parking in Banff, so if you're visiting, it would be best to park in the station car park, which is free. You can have a nice walk around the township of Banff and also make your way to the first attraction that we went to, which was the Banff Gondola and Sulphur Mountain. It was early in the season, so we had no difficulty in booking tickets to the gondola on the same day. If you're going in peak season, I would recommend that you pre-book tickets, and the shuttle bus to the gondola is also complimentary with your ticket. If you've got an issue with heights, I would seriously reconsider going up on the gondola. And going up there, I'd allow at least 2.5 hours to give you plenty of time to walk around and explore the beauty once you're up the top and exploring Sulphur Mountain. Bring warm clothes because the elevation at Sulphur Mountain is around 2,300 metres and often the temperature can drop below zero. Once you get up there, you'll have spectacular views of Sulphur Mountain, the Bow River Valley, which Banff sits in, as well as the nearby mountain. As the ride up. Once you get the shuttle bus back into the Banff township, you've got the option of walking around and doing a bit of shopping. If you're staying here, obviously, that's ideal. For us, we were staying in Canmore. We did have a look around the Banff township and had dinner at the Maple Leaf, an early dinner before driving back to Canmore and checking into our accommodation. We stayed at the Sunset Resort in Canmore. I will do a separate review of this resort in an upcoming video. I'll also cover more of the Canmore Township in a separate video. Day 2 of our itinerary begins for us in Canmore. We drive out to Johnston Canyon, a journey of 47 kilometres and around 3/4 of an hour, via Route 1, the Trans-Canadian Highway. The drive on this highway is absolutely gorgeous. Tall, towering, snow-capped mountains. It certainly is a visual feast. Route 1 gives way to the Bow River Parkway. And if you're coming to some of the key attractions, it does pay to get there early because the car parks get awfully full later in the day. There's free entrance to the Johnston Canyon, and basically you have two options. The lower falls are 1.1 kilometres, around 30 minutes from this point, while the upper falls are 2.6 kilometres and around a 1 hour one-way trip. The trip to the lower falls is mostly flat and only requires a moderate level of fitness. The longer walk to the upper falls requires a The longer walk to the upper falls requires a significant greater level of fitness and mobility. I thoroughly enjoyed the trip here to Johnston Canyon. I think it's one of the highlights of my trip. Photos of the landscape. If you're hungry, the bistro, the Market Cafe, provides great meals at good value for money. It was time to move on to our next destination. We headed back in the direction of Canmore. Our destination was Cascade Ponds. This is around 28 minutes and 29 kilometres from Johnston Canyon. Cascade Ponds are basically two small little ponds or lakes offering fantastic views of the surrounding mountainside. These ponds are quite popular with families. There was quite a few people around when we visited, and there's even barbecue facilities there. The final destination for the day is Minnewanka Lake. This is only 5 kilometres and a couple of minutes away from Cascade Ponds. Lake Minnewanka is the second largest lake in the Canadian Rockies. It's 21 kilometres long and around 142 metres deep in its deepest part. You can catch a ferry on the lake on the other side of the dam wall. It costs between 65 and 80 Canadian dollars depending on demand and time of year. We decided not to take this cruise. And that completes the itinerary for day 2. Day 3 of our itinerary is an easier day. We begin the day by exploring Canmore. It's a quieter and less touristy town than Banff. It is delightful in its own way, however. There's plenty of different architecture. The main street closes to traffic in summer, and there's many shops and cafes and eateries. We dined at the Rocky Mountain Bagel Company. Had some fantastic bagels there. I encourage you to explore the town of Canmore. And you can't visit Canmore unless you go through the Policeman's Creek trail system. It's a very well maintained pathway that leads via the creek that surrounds the town of Canmore. The scenery from this trail is spectacular. Complete your day 3 itinerary. The itinerary for day 4 is probably my most anticipated itinerary. It's a drive out to Lake Louise and Moraine Lake, ran about 80 kilometres and an hour's drive away from Canmore. We arrived at the Lake Louise Inn nice and early and had time for a coffee and a cake before catching our organised tour with the Fairview Limousine Company. If you want to visit these lakes, which are highlights of the Banff National Park, you need to note that there's no private vehicle access to Moraine Lake and there's very, very limited parking at Lake Louise, so your only option really is to catch a Canada Parks shuttle bus to the lakes. Unfortunately, we tried to book these shuttle buses about a month before our intended day of departure, and there were no bookings available. So our only option was to book a private tour, and it happened to be with Fairview Limousine. I would highly recommend Fairview Limousine if you do wish to take a private tour or unable to make a booking with a shuttle service. So it does plan to book your shuttle service well in advance of your intended day of travel. It was quite cold when we were there. It was actually snowing for a bit. My advice would be to bring plenty of warm clothes along and bring warm layers. It was a pretty cold day when we visited. Moraine Lake was mostly frozen over, and whilst Lake Louise was thawed out, we didn't get to experience the deep bluey green turquoise colour that typifies these lakes. If I was to go again, I'd go at least a couple of weeks later in the season. And if you're worried about bears, don't be. All the paths we were on were very well frequented by visitors, and we didn't see one bear on any of our walks. The Fairview Limousine tour was absolutely fantastic. I'd heartily recommend it. And to finish off the itinerary for day 4, we had a fantastic meal at the Georgetown Inn and Pub in Canmore. The beer was great and the food was even better. Day 5 is a pretty big day. It's a big day of driving and a big day of touring. It covers the distance between Canmore and Jasper of around 311 kilometres and around about 3.5 hours of driving. Along the way, we stop at 5 different attractions. You'll need to set out fairly early, 7:30 a.m. at the latest. The first of which is Bow Lake. Bow Lake is a high lake on the Icefields Parkway. It was cold, snowing, and the lake was frozen when we visited. About 5 kilometres away is Peyto Lake. The parking lots of both lakes are just off the main highway. The path from the car park to Peyto Lake Lookout is 700 metres. It's supposed to take 5 minutes. It took us more than 20 minutes because the path was icy and extremely slippery and dangerous. So if you're going early in the season, make sure that you bring adequate footwear. The slippery effort of walking there was well worth it because once we got to the lookout, the views of Peyto Lake were absolutely breathtaking. The lake wasn't frozen and we were able to see its deep blue colour, especially when the sun came out. After visiting those spectacular lakes, get on the road again and, if you're lucky, you might even spot a black bear. This is the first of many bears and wild animals that we saw during our trip on the Canadian Rockies. Make sure you stop at the Big Ben observation post. You'll get spectacular views of the Icefields Parkway from a very high mountain pass. Around 10 kilometres further on is the Colombia Icefield Parkway Adventure. This is where you get to walk on an actual glacier as well as go on a skywalk that's suspended many hundreds of metres above a valley floor. Tickets are timed, so make sure you purchase your tickets in advance to avoid any disappointment. We booked our tickets for 1:45, which allowed plenty of time to visit the earlier attractions. You spend about half an hour on the glacier, and it's a surreal, magical experience, one that I'll never forget. You'll get to ride on a huge four-wheel drive Polar Explorer up to the glacier, which is around 2,400 metres in elevation. Once you finish at the glacier, you'll be taken by bus to the Skywalk. This is a glass-floored observation deck that is 1,000 feet or around 280 metres suspended above the valley floor below. If you've got an issue with heights, I wouldn't recommend going here. Not at all. You can spend as much time as you want at the Skywalk, after which you need to queue up at the bus stop to take you back to the visitor centre, where you can grab a decent meal at the cafeteria-style restaurant. All in all, we spent just over 3 hours at the Columbia Icefield Parkway Adventure. We hopped in a car and drove towards Jasper. Now, just a word of warning, there was major fires that hit the Jasper National Park and Jasper Township in July of 2024. About a third of the town was destroyed and extensive damage to shops and businesses. As of early September 2024, the town of Jasper and Jasper National Park is still closed to visitors. If you're intending to visit, please make sure that you check the Parks Canada website to see whether the town and the park are open for business. The Columbia Icefields is probably as far north as you can currently get at this time. Our fifth and final stop was the Athabasca Pass Lookout. This lookout is high in the mountains and provides fantastic views of the Athabasca Pass as well as Mount Edith Clavell and other surrounding mountains. After a huge day of driving and touring, we finally arrived at Jasper. We checked into our accommodation, which was the Alpine Village. These are charming cabins that sit right on the banks of the Athabasca River. Unfortunately, more than a third of the cabins burnt down during the fire, and this accommodation won't be open until spring of 2025. I will do a separate review of this in an upcoming video. And that was it, day 5 of our itinerary in the Canadian Rockies. It's day 6 of our itinerary and we're exploring the attractions of Jasper National Park. We'll be driving on the Icefield Parkway again, and we'll need the Canada National Parks Pass, either a day ticket that you can buy at one of these booths or the annual ticket that we bought before leaving Australia. I'll leave a link in the description. One of the things you really need to be aware of when you're driving in the Canadian Rockies is that motorists can brake quite suddenly as soon as they spot animals at the side of the road. So long as you're prepared to stop and make sure you give way to the animals, you'll be fine. There's no fences along this section of the Icefields Parkway, and that's one of the reasons the speed limit is limited to 90 kilometers an hour or 55 miles per hour. The first destination is Sunwapta Falls, 55 kilometers or around 3/4 of an hour driving away. As you can see from the Google Maps images, the route is currently closed to all traffic at the moment. It also pays to get there early because we managed to get the last spot in the car park. There are a series of waterfalls at Sunwapta Falls. The upper falls are only about 100 meters from the car park along a very walkable and accessible track. The lower falls are on a more challenging track that is about half an hour each way and is quite steep in some sections and full of tree roots. So if you've got mobility issues, I probably wouldn't venture down to the lower. Pizza has ice cold beers and good value, delicious pizzas. I would recommend this place for lunch. After a wonderful lunch, we made our way to our next destination, Clavell Lake. This is to the north of Jasper, around 26 kilometers in about half an hour. Unfortunately, when we got there, we found out the road was closed because of fallen rocks. The road is still closed because of the wildfires. This is a view from the lake that we missed out on. And in the next set of images, the top one shows what the road was like before the wildfires, and the bottom one shows what it's like after the wildfires. Total devastation. The final destination on today's itinerary is Maligne Canyon. This is a short 11 kilometre or 13-minute trip from the town of Jasper to the car park at Maligne Canyon. It's an easy drive and the car park there is quite big we didn't have an issue finding a car spot. The loop trail around the canyon is around a couple of kilometers long. There are a number of steps and requires a moderate amount of mobility and fitness. The large extended hike covers 6 bridges over the canyon. The loop trail that we did only covered the first 3 bridges across the canyon. It's a fantastic attraction to see. It's amazing that the land is relatively flat, and then you've got a canyon that is gouged by a river that goes up to picnic area. This is only about 500 metres along a very well maintained path. There's a nice high lookout at the end of the path, giving different views of the Lake Maligne area and the high mountains that are its backdrop. The lake is a stunningly beautiful and tranquil, peaceful place to visit. It really shouldn't be missed. What you can miss out on is hiring a canoe. The prices are eye-watering. Yikes. After you finished your cruise or your hike, as the case may be, there are a number of places where you can grab something to eat. There's the Waffle Hut, but sadly for me, I couldn't go here because I had nothing gluten-free. There's also a cafeteria-style restaurant in the lake house. The coffee at the lake house was terrible. The food was okay, but I've got to admit the views were to die for. Take a look. We were even entertained by a squirrel running around on the deck. We finished our lunch and had another last look around the lake. The place is really sublime. We didn't really feel like leaving. The beauty just took our breath away. But we did leave and made our way to the car and headed to the next destination on the itinerary, Pyramid Lake. This is around 53 kilometres and a 1 hour drive from Maligne Lake on gorgeous, gorgeous roads. Pyramid Lake wasn't quite as impressive as we had anticipated, but what we should have done is gone to Pyramid Island. I think that would have provided better vantage point to look across the lake and onto the mountain ranges beyond it. We just didn't see the deep blue colour of the lake from where we were. We decided to drive on to Patricia Lake. This is only about 1 kilometre away from Pyramid Lake. The car park at Patricia Lake is quite small. If you blink, you'll miss it. It does lead down a pathway to the gorgeous Patricia Lake. In many respects, this was a much better visual feast than Pyramid Lake. The turquoise colour of Patricia Lake was truly magnificent. I think out of the two lakes, this is the better of them. After leaving Patricia Lake, we drive to our final destination, Emerald Pond. Emerald Pond is around 29 kilometres and about half an hour away from Pyramid Lake and Patricia Lake. In order to get to it from Pyramid Lake, you need to go back into Jasper and out again north towards Emerald Pond. The car park is just off the main highway and it's quite small. Once you get out, you'll pass Sulphur Spring, which, as the name suggests, is a spring that is full of sulphur-laden water, down a path adjacent to the very busy highway, and there you see it, Emerald Pond. The pond gets its colour from all the minerals and organic material in the water. It truly is a striking colour. That was truly stunning. On this itinerary, we've seen 4 lakes and 1 pond, an emerald pond at that. It's time to head back to Jasper. This is just a short drive, about 10 kilometres and about 15 minutes away. Hopefully, you'll get to see as many animals that we did driving around to all the different lakes. We got to Jasper and realised that we hadn't really had a proper look around town. So that's what we did, had a proper look around town. We walked through the many streets, checked out the railway station with its gorgeous black locomotive, and looked for a place where we could get an early dinner. Joe had yet to have a beaver tail, probably because I couldn't eat one because they weren't gluten-free. And we had another good look around before deciding that the Jasper Brewing Company was the place that we were going to have dinner. It's a really great place to eat. They have gluten-free as well as vegetarian meals and a great vibe, and you can order a paddle of 6 different beers to try out all the different beers that they brew on site. I really liked all the beers, especially the IPA. The food was pretty great too. I would highly recommend you coming to Jasper Brewing Company for dinner if you're staying in Jasper. So after another big day of touring, it was time for an early night. Sadly, it's day 8 of the itinerary for the epic Canadian Rockies trip. It's a big driving day. It's driving 608 kilometres between Jasper and Merritt, and it's over 5.5 hours of driving. The first stop on the journey is Peyto Lake. Unfortunately, we missed it. If you see the British Columbia and Alberta border sign, you should park, because that is the car park to Portal Lake. We didn't have the opportunity to turn around anywhere because it was quite a busy highway, so we kept on driving. It's only a few kilometres past Jasper. Don't make our mistake, pull off when you've seen the sign. And this is what you'll see if you do stop at the lake. The next destination is Mount Robson's Visitor Centre. This is around 87 kilometres and just on an hour's drive from Jasper. And a word of warning, after you leave the visitor centre, there's not much in the way of cell phone coverage or petrol stations, so fill up your tank and make sure you download your offline maps before you leave. The visitor centre is quaint, but it does feature a big car park, a nearby cafe and petrol station. It's a good vantage point to check out Mount Robson. Mount Robson is the most prominent mountain in North America's entire Rocky Mountain range. It's the highest point in the Canadian Rockies. It's located entirely within the Mount Robson Provincial Park in British Columbia. Its elevation is 3,954 metres, or nearly 13,000 feet. It's also advisable to bring a good pair of sunglasses because the glare can be a bit much sometimes. The rest of the 400 odd kilometre drive is spectacular but uneventful. You can probably stop at Clearwater for a driver change and a coffee, but otherwise just enjoy the view. The tall Rockies give way to wider valleys and lower hills, all the way to Merritt. We were going to go to Vancouver and Vancouver Island from Merritt, but if you intend to head back to Calgary, that journey from Jasper to Calgary is around about 412 kilometres and 4.5 hours of driving, so it's probably an easier day driving, but you'd be covering ground that you've already travelled before. The roads are very, very easy to drive on, very high standard, and provided spectacular views of the scenery and the landscape as we drove by. It took around about 8 hours to get to Merritt, including a couple of stops along the way. If you're feeling adventurous, you could probably stop at Kamloops before you get to Merritt to have a look around. We stayed at the Ramada in Merritt, and I would recommend staying here. I will do a separate review of this hotel in a video shortly. Expect it to be a hell of a lot warmer in Merritt than it was in Jasper, being closer to sea level. I was in shorts and a t-shirt and sandals. For dinner, I'd recommend Home Restaurant. It's right next door to the Ramada. It offers quite a few gluten-free as well as vegetarian meals and an interesting selection of some of the local beers. We tried the Honey Brown Lager. Nice, ice cold and refreshing. The food was also excellent. Truly fantastic food. That unassuming but fantastic meal was a great way to cap off what was a perfect 8-day self-drive itinerary in the Canadian Rockies. We had such a fabulous time going to lakes, mountains, ponds, gorges, you name it, we saw it. It's a trip that will remain with us for a very long time. If you wish to use our itinerary, don't forget to download the free one-page PDF or the paid 14-page PDF from my Buy Me a Coffee storefront. I'll be releasing 8 videos in coming weeks covering each of the days of the itinerary that I've set out in this video. I do hope you've liked this video. If so, please hit that like and subscribe button. Hit that notify bell so you'll be notified of all my future Canadian Rockies videos. If you'd like to support my channel, please consider buying me a coffee or hitting that super thanks button. And until my next video from the Canadian Rockies, you take care and bye now.